There is a file. It exists. It has a classification number. It has a date. It has the names of 7 men attached to it. 7 men who were real, who served, who were deployed, and who came back from somewhere. They were never officially sent to do something that was never officially authorized. The file exists in a government archive that has been responding to Freedom of Information requests about it since 1987. Every request has received the same response. The document you are requesting is currently withheld in full under Exemption 1. Information properly classified pursuant to Executive Order, and Exemption 3, information specifically exempted from disclosure by statute, not redacted, not partially released, withheld in full for 40 years. The mission it describes lasted 11 days. 11 days in a location that does not appear in any official military deployment record from that period. 11 days that 7 men have never been able to discuss under penalty of a security agreement they signed before they understood what they were agreeing to. 11 days that cost something, the exact nature of which has been withheld in full for 4 decades, that the United States government has decided is still too dangerous to acknowledge. You are about to find out why. In the spring of 1984, 7 Special Operations personnel were called into a briefing room at a base in the continental United States. The briefing was conducted by 2 men they had not met before. The men wore civilian clothes. They did not introduce themselves by name or rank. The briefing room had been swept for electronic devices before the 7 men entered. The door was locked from the outside. They were told the following. They were being activated for a training exercise in a classified location. The exercise would last approximately 2 weeks. It would involve contact with a foreign national who was cooperating with American intelligence interests. Their role was to provide security and extraction capability if the cooperation arrangement required physical relocation of the foreign national. Standard language, standard mission type. Nothing about it was unusual. One of the 7 men, a staff sergeant named Kowalski, who had done 3 previous deployments of this type, later told his brother, in a conversation his brother did not fully understand until 30 years later, and that the briefing had felt wrong in a way he could not articulate. Not dangerous, wrong. The difference, Kowalski said, was that dangerous missions feel like something. Wrong missions feel like nothing. Like the men running the briefing already knew how it ended and were simply reading lines. The 7 men shipped out 4 days later. The training exercise designation on their travel orders was Operation Clearwater. There is no record of Operation Clearwater in any publicly accessible military archive. What happened during those 11 days has been reconstructed from 3 sources. The first source is a series of personal letters written by one of the 7 men, a communications specialist named Hartwell, to his wife during a previous deployment. The letters established his writing patterns, his vocabulary, his concerns, yet they were used to authenticate a document that appeared in 2019 when Hartwell's widow was going through the last of his belongings after moving out of their home of 31 years. The document was 11 pages, handwritten, dated across 11 consecutive days in April 1984. It was not a letter, it was a record. Hartwell had kept a record. The second source is a partially declassified CIA operational summary from 1986 that references, in a single sentence, buried in an appendix, a cooperative extraction in a Central American location involving special operations personnel and a foreign national identified only as Asset 14. The third source is a man who was 22 years old in 1984 and who now lives in a city in the American Midwest and who has never spoken to a journalist and who agreed to speak to one researcher once, due in 2021, on the condition that nothing he said would be published until after his death. He has not died yet. What these three sources establish, taken together, is the following. Operation Clearwater was not a training exercise. Asset 14 was not a cooperative foreign national. And the extraction that took place on the 9th day was not a relocation. The 7 men returned to the United States on April 28, 1984. Within 72 hours of their return, each of them was called in individually for what was described as a post-deployment debrief. The debriefs were conducted in separate locations, on separate days, by separate teams. None of the 7 men was told that the others were being debriefed. None of them was told what the others had said. Each of them was shown a document. The document was a legal instrument that, or in the language of intelligence community practice, is called an expanded non-disclosure agreement, a classification beyond standard NDA that includes provisions for criminal prosecution under the Espionage Act for unauthorized disclosure of the covered material. They signed it, not under threat, under the reasonable understanding, which the men presenting the document made clear without stating explicitly that their continued service, their benefits, their pensions, and the well-being of anyone who shared their last name depended on their signature. This is the first layer of the erasure. The second layer was administrative. The 7 men were reassigned within 30 days, not to punitive postings, to ordinary ones. Good assignments in some cases. Here are assignments that moved them away from anyone they might have spoken to about what happened. Away from each other, dispersed across 4 different bases in 3 different countries in a pattern that, if you mapped it, looked exactly like what it was. A deliberate separation of 7 people who shared a secret. The third layer was the file itself. A file exists. The file is real. The file is classified. The file is the proof. And the proof is locked in a system that has been legally responding to requests about it for 40 years by confirming that it exists and refusing to say what is in it. This is the most sophisticated form of erasure, not destroying the evidence, hiding it in plain sight behind a wall that the law built and the law maintains. Kowalski died in 2019. He was 61 years old. He died of a cardiac event at his home in rural Pennsylvania. He had been retired for 18 years. He had, in those 18 years, worked as a mechanic, coached youth baseball for 11 seasons, and attended church every Sunday at a congregation where he had been a member since 1997. His pastor described him as a quiet man who was generous with his time and careful with his words. His son Danny was 34 years old when his father died. Danny had known his father was a veteran. He had known his father had done things he didn't talk about. He had grown up understanding, in the wordless way children of soldiers come to understand things, that there were rooms in his father's life that had no doors, not locked, just absent, as if the rooms had never been built. 3 weeks after the funeral, and Danny was going through the last boxes from his father's workshop, he found a photograph. The photograph showed 6 men in civilian clothes standing in front of a building Danny did not recognize. His father was one of the 6. They were not smiling. They were not looking at the camera. They looked, Danny later said, like men who had just been told something and had not yet decided what to do with the information. On the back of the photograph, in his father's handwriting, was a date, April 24th, 1984, and a location, 2 words Danny did not recognize. He looked them up. Danny submitted his first Freedom of Information request in March 2020. The response arrived 11 months later. It confirmed that records responsive to his request existed. It declined to release them. It cited Exemption 1 and Exemption 3. It provided a case number for appeal. He appealed. The appeal was denied 14 months later with identical language. He hired a lawyer who specialized in national security FOIA litigation. The lawyer filed a lawsuit in federal district court. The government responded with a motion to dismiss, arguing that even confirming the specific nature of the classified material would cause damage to national security. The judge, a federal district court judge with full security clearance who reviewed the classified filing in camera, ruled in the government's favor. The case was appealed to the circuit court. The circuit court affirmed. Danny is currently preparing a petition to the Supreme Court. He is 39 years old. His father's photograph sits on his desk. He is not alone in this, since 3 of the other 6 men in that photograph have surviving family members who have filed similar requests. 2 have died without ever learning what the location on the back of their father's photograph meant. One family received a response so heavily redacted that the only legible words on the 4-page document were the date and the case number. The wall is not breaking. The wall has not moved in 40 years. The wall is the point. Here is what Operation Clearwater actually was. Asset 14 was not a cooperative foreign intelligence source. Asset 14 was a senior official in a Central American government that the United States was publicly supporting in 1984. A government whose human rights record was, at that moment, the subject of active congressional investigation and international condemnation, where Asset 14 had decided to cooperate with congressional investigators. The extraction on Day 9 was not a relocation to safety. The 7 men were not told this before they deployed. They were told what they needed to be told. They performed their mission with the professionalism and precision they had been trained to deliver. They came home, they signed the documents, they dispersed. The congressional investigation concluded in 1985 with findings that were significant but incomplete. Significant because they documented serious abuses, incomplete because a key witness who had agreed to testify was no longer available. Asset 14 was never found. The government officials whose conduct that witness would have described are, several of them, still alive. Some of them have received commendations since 1984, and none of them have ever been in the same room as any of the 7 men who made their continued freedom possible. This is why 40 years was not long enough. The mission cannot be acknowledged because acknowledging it requires acknowledging what it was for. And what it was for involves people who are still here. And people who are still here can still be held accountable. The classification is not protecting national security. It is protecting individuals. Danny found the location on the back of the photograph. He found what had happened there. Not everything. The classified file still exists, still withheld in full, still behind the wall that 40 years of legal architecture built and maintains. But enough. It's enough to understand what his father had spent 35 years of Sundays and youth baseball seasons and careful words carrying around without ever being able to put it down. Enough to understand why his father had looked the way he looked in that photograph. Like a man who had just been told something and had not yet decided what to do with the information. There is something specific about a secret that takes 40 years to keep. A secret that takes 40 years is not being kept because of what it reveals about the past. A secret that takes 40 years is being kept because of what it reveals about the present. about who is still here, about what they built with what they did, about the distance between the official version of events and the version that 7 men and their families have been living with since 1984. The mission was not erased because it failed. Failures get acknowledged eventually. Failures become lessons. Failures can be absorbed into the official narrative with enough time and enough distance. The mission was erased because it succeeded. And the success is still paying dividends. And the people collecting those dividends are still alive.